The prairie wind carried dust like ashes across the Hensley farm, and Clara May stood in it as though she were the last stone left behind after a crumbling wall. Her shawl was too thin for the cold, threadbare where the cloth had worn through, but her mother's eyes were colder still, narrowing with something sharp, almost cruel. Clara listened without a word, for silence had long been her only shield, but words still fell heavy on her like stones. "She's no use here, Thomas." "No use at all," her father's jaw tightened. Thomas Hensley was a man ground down by drought and disappointment, his hands calloused from plow and rope, his voice stripped bare of tenderness years ago. "We can't keep feeding what don't give back," he muttered. "Winter's coming hard. We all got to pull our weight." His eyes shifted toward Clara, not cruel, but practical, as if he were talking about a mule too lame to carry water. Her breath caught, though she'd known this moment was stalking her for months. Since the fever years ago had left her weak, bones brittle, arms too slender for carrying more than a small pail, her family had called her fragile, then useless, then worse. "A mouth without hands," her brother once sneered. Tonight they made the thought flesh. The sound of boots in the dirt broke the silence. From beyond the fence line, a figure came, broad-shouldered, hat brim low, a rifle slung across his back, though he carried no menace in his step. Jedediah Boone, known simply as Jed to most in town, moved with the kind of stillness that seemed carved into him by years alone in the mountains. Men whispered he'd buried a wife once, and that grief had driven him where others would not go, up into the ridges where only pines and snow kept company. He stopped a few yards away, eyes steady beneath his shadowed brim. "I'll take her," Clara's heart lurched. The words rang like a judgment and a reprieve at once. Her mother's face eased with relief. Her father nodded curtly as if a deal had been struck before the man even spoke. "You're certain?" Thomas asked. Jed gave one slow nod. No haggling, no hesitation. A quiet man giving a quiet verdict. Her mother placed a bundle in Clara's hands. Meager possessions, a threadbare dress, a worn comb. "You'll be better off," Ruth said flatly, though her eyes betrayed no softness, only the hunger of a woman who saw one less burden in a season of scarcity. Clara wanted to beg, just once, for her mother's arms, her father's approval, her place at the table. But the words shriveled before they reached her lips. When Jed reached for her bundle, his hands were rough, scarred from axe and hunt, yet strangely careful, as though he feared breaking the little she carried. He didn't touch her. He only tipped his hat, then turned toward the mountains. And like a tethered lamb, she followed. The land changed as they walked. Dusty fields gave way to winding trails where pine needles softened each step. The air grew sharper, filled with resin and the scent of cold earth. Clara stumbled often, her shoes too thin for the rocky path. But each time she faltered, Jed paused, not speaking, simply waiting for her breath to steady before moving on. It was a silence less punishing than her family's, and that difference alone began to unravel her. By dusk, the mountain shadows had swallowed them whole. The cabin appeared suddenly, hewn from logs thick as her waist, roof sloped under a blanket of moss. Smoke curled from its chimney in a ribbon of blue, and for the first time, Clara realized this man had not only come for her, he had prepared a place. Inside smelled of wood smoke and pine tar. A single chair stood near the fire, a table with scars of old cuts, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and jerky. It was plain, almost bare, but it felt sturdier than any room she had known. Jed set her bundle on a bench and stoked the fire higher. Only then did his voice, deep and rough as gravel, break the quiet. "You can sleep by the hearth tonight." "I'll take the cot." Clara nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt too thick, as though words would betray her trembling heart. That night, she lay curled near the fire, heat seeping into bones chilled from years of thin blankets. The mountain man sat by the window, rifle across his lap, not watching her but the dark woods beyond. His stillness carried no weight of expectation, no demand that she prove her worth. And for the first time in her memory, she drifted into sleep without fear of waking to scorn. Days turned to weeks. Clara's hands blistered from splitting kindling, then slowly toughened. She learned to carry water from the creek without spilling, to stack logs without tipping them. She burned their first meal, a skillet of beans too long on the flame, and flushed with shame when smoke filled the cabin. But Jed ate without a word, only nodding once as if to say, "It's enough." When he tore his sleeve on a bramble one evening, she fetched needle and thread, stitching by lantern light. Her fingers trembled, pricking herself more than once, but he wore the shirt afterward as though her crooked stitches were finer than store-bought cloth. He never praised her, never mocked her. His silence was a field where her dignity could sprout, untrampled. Snow fell one night, silent as feathers drifting past the window. Clara woke shivering until a blanket, heavier than her own, was laid across her shoulders. She looked up to find Jed already turning away, wordless. That one gesture pressed against the hollow in her chest, where belonging had once lived. The town still remembered her, though, and it remembered cruelly. When spring thaw let them ride into the settlement for supplies, whispers coiled like snakes. Ezekiel Crow leaned against the storepost, smirking as his wife Martha muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Hensley sold her off, didn't they? Poor fool Boon, shackled with a useless mouth to feed." Laughter rippled like dry corn husks. Clara burned, face hot with shame. She wanted the ground to open, to swallow her. But Jed said nothing, didn't quicken his pace, didn't let his shoulders bend under the weight of scorn. He simply stood at her side, broad and steady, paying for flour and salt as though no words had touched them. His silence was her shield. Summer warmed the mountain, and with it, Clara's spirit. She laughed once, startled at the sound, when a rabbit darted from the garden patch she had coaxed from rocky soil. Jed looked up from splitting wood, and though his mouth barely curved, the smallest flicker of a smile lit his eyes. It was enough. She grew stronger. Her arms carried more water, her back straightened beneath heavier loads. She found she could sing, softly, while hanging wash by the stream, her voice fragile but alive. Jed never interrupted, only lingered nearby with quiet tasks, as though the sound itself was gift enough. The cabin became hers as much as his. She swept its floor, mended its curtains, planted herbs by the window. What had begun as a cage now breathed like a sanctuary. Each nail he hammered, each log he split, became a testament. She was not discarded here. She was built into something enduring. But gossip lingered. One evening, Ezekiel Crow passed their trail and spat words meant to wound. "She'll never give you sons, Boon. You took in a burden. Fool's kindness." Clara froze, waiting for Jed's silence to falter, for him to finally see her through their eyes. Instead, the mountain man picked up his hammer. That week he set to work expanding the cabin, adding a second room, plank by plank. The sound of each strike rang like defiance, louder than any sermon. When Martha Crow rode by, tongue sharp, Jed didn't answer her barbs. He let the cabin answer for him, and Clara, standing with sawdust in her hair, felt something shift deep inside. He was not just giving her shelter. He was planting her dignity back into soil that could finally hold it. The night the cabin stood complete, a storm rolled in, rain hammering the roof, wind clawing at the shutters. Clara stood in the doorway of her new room, the walls raw with fresh wood. Her heart swelled with something too large for silence. She turned toward Jed, words trembling on her lips. But before she could speak, he set down his hammer and met her eyes with a quiet that said all she needed. "You belong here. You are worth the space you take." And in that thunderous night, Clara's shame broke, not into pieces, but into light. For the first time she knew, she was no longer useless, no longer sold. She was kept. Perhaps you too have known the sting of being called worthless. Remember this. There are cabins still waiting to be built, rooms still waiting for your laughter, silences waiting to cradle your presence. The world may discard, but love, quiet, steadfast love, can gather what is broken and make it holy again. What the gossips cannot see, the mountains will remember. You are not useless. You are the home someone has been waiting for.